Reckless, how are we doing? Welcome back to another week. Todd Hampton back with you, our high school pastor. So excited that you have tuned in for another week. I want to say a quick shout out to all of our virtual students. Glad that you have tuned in. Hopefully you're watching our live stream right now. That, by the way, as we said last week, you can watch every week right here. Tune in live Sunday night at 7 o'clock and join us live. And then you can jump into one of our virtual groups right after. Maybe you're watching this week. Maybe you don't know anything about our student ministry. You've never stepped foot in person with us. And maybe you're interested in that. So maybe this is your first step of just checking out what we do. So we're excited that you are jumping in, excited that you're with us. And we've got a great opportunity for you to join us in person next week on Halloween night. So some of you may be like, I don't really want to go trick-or-treating with my 7-year-old sister. Some of you don't really want to have to give candy out to all the neighborhood kids. You got nothing going on. Maybe you do have stuff going on, but we want you here. So in person next week, we will not be doing a video for next week. Instead, all of our effort and attention is going to be on getting people in person next week. So we've got a special Halloween at Reckless. So if you're not too scared, check this out. All right, so I hope you didn't wet yourself, pee your pants, or anything like that. I don't even know if I'm allowed to say that, but I just did. But we want you to come next Sunday night, 6:30 to 9:30, in person here on the campus of Westridge Church. We got a great night planned. So we'll have a costume contest. We want all you guys coming and dressing up. We'll have a haunted woods. We'll be watching a movie out in the back parking lot. We'll have some popcorn, we'll have hot chocolate and apple cider, and just a really fun night together to celebrate each other and just have a great night on Halloween night. So we want you to come and be with us in person. It might scare you a little bit. We got some fun stuff planned that you're going to want to be a part of. So remember, no video next week, but we will jump back in with our weekly video 2 weeks from this week. So another in-person opportunity for you is our Nicaragua team. So those spots on that team is filling up really fast. We got a couple more weeks before registration ends, and we would love for you to come and be a part of that trip. So it's over winter break. So in February, there's the dates and all the information on the screen. And so you can go to westridge.com/Nicaragua and find out more information, and just pray, talk to mom and dad, see what it would look like for you to join us on an amazing trip where we get a chance to be the hands and feet of Jesus in a third world country. So one other thing I want to mention to you, and this is available to you guys as virtual students too. So this last series that we did called I Got You, where we try to define what community can look like. And so we gave these 4 aspects that define biblical community, authentic biblical community. And so we've got these wristbands made that just say I got you on them. And then it's got those 4 aspects of authentic biblical community. And so we've made these available to our students in person. If you would like one, then let us know. So you can drop us a line in the comment and we'll reach out to you and then send you one. You also, for virtual students, can let your leaders know, and we'll make sure that we get a wristband to you too. So just a way for that to stay fresh in our mind all year of what biblical community can look like and how we can offer something to your generation that no one else can. All right, well, our new series that we're starting for this week is called Let's Talk About It. There are so many issues, topics, things that sometimes the church, we don't want to avoid it. It feels like taboo. No, we can't talk about that. When this series, we're going to talk about it. We're going to talk about some of those hot button issues, and specifically things that I believe your generation needs to know about, needs to talk about, so that we can have a healthy biblical understanding about what God says and how we can engage the culture around us. And so we're going to ease into this series just with kind of a little bit of a layup conversation, a layup topic, kind of dip our toes into the water a little bit. We're going to talk about politics. The opposite of everything I just said. No, we're going to start with let the fireworks go, right? I mean, this is one of the craziest, one of the most divisive topics. It's like, man, do not talk about politics in church. And we just came out of a presidential election where right before the election, Pew Research did a study, and 9 of 10, both Republicans and Democrats, felt that if the other team won, the other side won, they were worried about the state of the country long term. They were worried that it would ever recover. And I think there's some people that still believe that. Everything has become political, right? No matter what you're talking about, whether it's vaccines or masks, somehow those have become political. You want to talk about healthcare, you want to talk about the border, you want to talk about abortion, you want to talk about like all these different kind of things. And it's all political. We can't even cheer on our friend Brandon anymore without it turning political. Everything has become political. And it has seeped into the church, and we become divisive within the church. And you hear statements that people say, man, I don't know how they can be a Christian and vote Democrat. Or I don't know how they could call themselves a Christian and vote for Trump. And we hear those kind of things said from other Christians. And we form our political beliefs based on what we think should be right. And our political beliefs a lot of times can lead the way. And the question is that we want to tackle: how can we look at the issue of politics in a healthy way that honors God and each other? So that's what we're going to talk about. Now, before we do that, we've got to define what politics even means. And so here's the definition we're going to use for politics. It's the use of strategy in obtaining any position of power or control, whether in government, business, etc. Now, just take that definition. If the main goal of politics is power and control, then that should immediately give us pause as Christians, right? If a government is seeking political power and control, why should that be such an issue? Well, I think in order to understand that, we've got to look internally. I think we've got to understand what's in the heart of each of us as human beings, that we have a sin nature. And that sin nature is bent towards doing things that are self-serving, doing things that work out best for us. And so that's true of you, that's true of me, that's true of your student body president, that's true of the future boss that you're going to have at work, that's true of whatever political candidate you're talking about. We all have a sin nature inside of us that naturally is bent towards being self-seeking and seeking its own power and control. And so if those are the types of people when it comes to government that is forming and shaping government, then that means those government institutions or those things of power are naturally going to be self-seeking. Now, it doesn't mean that those things are all going to go off the deep end and start turning into Nazi Germany and Hitler. But it does mean that we all have a bent towards being self-reliant and self-serving. And that our own pride and what we want is constantly going to get in the way. And so when you've got governments that have been established by human beings and are being run by human beings and human systems, there's naturally going to be a failure to that. They're not going to be perfect. They're going to be flawed. And ultimately, if the more that those flaws come to the surface, the more that it's self-seeking and seeking power and control, what we know by history is that it's not going to last forever. See, you can look at any of the past great empires. Take Rome, for example, right? I mean, people said Rome would last forever, and yet it was founded by flawed humans. It was a human system that was set up. Human government was run by human beings, and it was flawed, and it couldn't last forever. And I can now pay $20 to go to Rome and see the ruins of that city and what that great empire used to be. And there's so many other nations like it, which should be a warning to all of us not to put our hope in political power. So what should we hope in? Well, I think as Christians, I think what we've got to be careful not to do is to separate Jesus from our politics, to separate Jesus from how we see the world. I mean, Jesus, if we are followers of Jesus, it should impact everything. What we see around us, what we believe, how we approach government, how we approach things like politics. And it should form everything. And one of the questions that we should ask is, Jesus, what do you want? How should I look at politics? How should I treat politics in my life? And so I want to give you the main point and then just kind of talk about a couple things to encourage you. So politics can be healthy when it's used as a tool to promote God's agenda and help expand his kingdom. When it's used as a tool to promote God's agenda and help expand his kingdom. So the first thing I would challenge us with is that Jesus and his kingdom must be at the center. It must be at the center. See, Jesus came to establish his own kingdom, not serve another one. He didn't come to sit on a physical throne and be king of another nation. No, he came really to deliver us out of that, to deliver us out of human power and authority, to deliver us out of our own sin and our own brokenness and the other things that sometimes can manipulate in a negative way, things like political power. He came to free us from that and rescue us from that. He came to make us a part of his kingdom. He came ultimately to free us from our own sin and to sit on the throne of our own hearts so that we would not fall prey to serve other human establishments or other human kingdoms or rulers, but rather so that we would be free to put Jesus on the throne of our heart and serve him alone. And so that is where we can find the ultimate peace and the ultimate hope of knowing that Jesus has established his kingdom and will be on that throne forever. There won't be any political manipulation to overthrow him. There won't be a greater king that will come and overtake Jesus. No, Jesus and his kingdom has been established and will rule and reign forever. I love what Psalm 68 or 67 says. David says, "May your ways be known throughout the earth, your saving power among people everywhere. May the nations praise you, O God. Yes, may all the nations praise you. Let the whole world sing for joy, because you govern the nations with justice and guide the people of the whole world. May the nations praise you, O God. Yes, may all the nations praise you. Then the earth will yield its harvest, and God, our God, will richly bless us. Yes, God will bless us, and people all over the world will fear him." Man, in that psalm, it seems like the nations exist for God, not the other way around. That the nations exist for him. And I think for us as Christians, sometimes we've got to realize that we serve the wrong kingdom. That we don't have Jesus and his kingdom at the center. Rather, we're serving the United States, or kind of we're aligned with Democrats or Republicans, or our allegiance goes to Trump or Biden and not Jesus and him alone. And I think that's one of the things that we've got to guard against, is to make sure that Jesus and his kingdom are at the center and not these other things, not a political party. And I think we've got to understand that Jesus isn't aligned with a political party. Jesus isn't a Republican. Jesus isn't a Democrat. Jesus is far above those things. He can't be limited or restricted just to one party. And we've got to be careful about keeping Jesus and aligning him with one political party. But Jesus sits above all that, and all the nations exist for God, not the other way around. There was a part when Jesus was on the earth where the Pharisees were trying to trap him and use his words against him, specifically with the nation of Rome. And so they asked him in Matthew chapter 22, and they said, "Hey, Jesus, should we pay taxes to Caesar?" And Jesus says, "Well, whose image is on the coin?" And they said, "Well, Caesar's." And then he says this in verse 21. He says, "Well, give to Caesar what belongs to Caesar, and give to God what belongs to God." Now, there's so many things that Jesus is saying just in that one statement. Those people walked away amazed. And I think ultimately what Jesus is trying to help us guard against is where our heart is in allegiance to. He gives permission to be involved in politics by saying, hey, give to Caesar what belongs to Caesar. But he's also making a statement that he's not aligned with political parties. He's not aligned with some of the things that politics are in place to accomplish, that Jesus has his own plans. And so he's saying, look, if you need to give taxes to Caesar, then give taxes to Caesar, but give to God what belongs to God. In other words, make sure these political things that they want to put money or power or control or some of these things on the table as importance. And Jesus is warning us that we don't need to put those things as the priority of our lives, but rather our allegiance and our heart should be tied to the things of God. That Jesus should have our heart, and that we should give to God the things that belong to him, that our heart and our allegiance and our focus and our attention and our service belongs to him more than anything else. Here's the second thing I think it's important for us to understand. Politics can be used to accomplish God's plan. See, I think for us, we can keep Jesus at the center and yet try to build God's kingdom in the lives of people all around us, and politics can be a tool in which to do that. I mean, I think just take this country, like we live in a great country, a nation that we should be thankful to be a part of, a nation that has been established to a certain extent with Christian values and ideas and things like that. And there are those beliefs that we can see through our nation's history, and that's a really great thing. But our nation is far from perfect. Our nation has some really deep struggles in our past, things like slavery. And we can celebrate our nation, and yet we can look right now at where we're at and look at opportunities for us to use God's kingdom and the things that God wants to accomplish in people's lives all around us. And politics can be a way that we can bring good for those around us with God's kingdom at the center. I love that the early church did this. I mean, there were 5 things that the early church kind of focused on. Number one, they focused on racial justice. They were multi-ethnic at so many of these churches. There were different nations and tribes and all these different people that made up the early church. And they celebrated that. They were for racial justice. They were for economic justice. They cared for the poor. They focused on people that had less than what they had, and they were looking for opportunities to serve others. The third thing that they did was they focused on reconciliation with everybody, including their enemies. They tried to find common ground with other people. Even as people were trying to kill them, they didn't seek retribution, but rather looked for reconciliation and caring for everybody. A couple other things that they did was they cared about the unborn. They cared about babies. They cared about things like abortion or even infanticide, where they would care for babies that were left to die at city gates and different villages and things like that. And the early Christians would take those babies and care for them. And so they cared about the unborn and even young babies. And even as you look, they cared about sexual morality. They fought for sexual morality. They stood up for what they believed in terms of what marriage was meant for and what God had established it to be. Now you look at the breakdown of those 5 things. I think the first 2, the racial injustice and economic, seems in our current political landscape seems more like democratic values, right? That would line up to the left. Then you look at the last 2, the abortion and the traditional values in terms of sexuality. Looks like it would be more conservative leaning or Republican. And you look at the one in the middle, and that doesn't look like any party, especially right now. And I think it's a warning to us that we not try to fit our worldview into just one political party. I think we've got to be really careful, like, for Republicans, that we could care about abortion and we could care about sexual morality, and yet we could not care about racial injustice or the poor, things like that. Or the opposite is true. Like, we could be democratic or liberal leaning, and we could care a lot about racial justice, and we could care a lot about economic justice, and yet we could not care about things like abortion and that kind of thing. And I think especially for your generation now, it's easier to care about things like racial injustice, and yet we don't really want to speak out about things like abortion or even sexuality or whatever because we don't want to be labeled a bigot. And yet we've got to understand that God, Jesus, and his kingdom are at the center. And politics can be a way for us to change the world around us and represent Jesus and communicate his love and his truth to people around us in a way that makes other lives better and allows them to see the best of what God has for them. So again, the main point for us this week, politics can be healthy when it's used as a tool to promote God's agenda and help expand his kingdom. I would just challenge us. I think we're seeing right now how politics, when it's not centered on Jesus, can go astray. And it can get divisive and it can be a hot mess. And I pray that we as followers of Jesus would not align ourselves just to one political party, would not jump into all the division and all of the disunity and all the chaos, but rather we would see the world around us and politics in general through the lens of who Jesus is and what he wants for us and those around us. And then may we communicate that in love and in truth to those around us to help make the world better. God, I thank you for the students who are watching this. I pray, God, that you would help us to be who you're calling us to be, God, that you would give us eyes to see, to be able to look and see what it is that you want. And whereas the rest of our culture right now is putting their hope and allegiance in a political party or in who the president is or whatever, God, I pray that we would be beyond that we would see that it is about you and your kingdom that will rule and reign forever, that it is far, far above and better than any of these earthly kingdoms that one day will fade away. And so, God, I pray that you'd help us to see it that way, but then engage the culture. God, be a part of the solution. God, use things like voting and, God, being involved in the different politics that we're able to do that with the right understanding of who you are so that we can impact the world around us with who you desire for us to be and who you desire others to be as well. And we'll thank you for it in Jesus' name. Amen. Well, guys, thank you so much for watching this week. I'm going to turn you loose to your virtual group. For the rest of you, have a great week. Don't forget, we won't be back this next Sunday, but we'll be back 2 weeks to continue our series, Let's Talk About It. Have a great week.